When it comes to dystopian fiction, there's always going to be that one book everyone cites as the OG, the one that started it all. For some people, it'll be The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. For others, it'll be Brave New World or 1984, both of which are heavily influenced by our next author, Yevgeny Zamyatin, who gave us what is widely considered to be the first major dystopian novel, We. In this video, we're going to talk about why We was such a groundbreaking work of literature and why it still matters today. To understand why We is so important, we have to understand when it was written and the context surrounding its creation. Because the story of We is set in a future version of Russia after the Russian Revolution. And even though Zamyatin wrote the novel in 1920, it wasn't set in the future at all, but rather in a fictionalized version of Petrograd where he lived. The industrialization of Russia during the early 20th century had brought with it a lot of change, but not necessarily for the better. And Zamyatin, who was an engineer before becoming a writer, saw firsthand how these changes were affecting people's lives. When we meet our protagonist, D503, the world he lives in is one of great change and rapid modernization, much like the Russia Zamyatin knew. This isn't surprising given that the revolution had a lot to do with new ideas of collectivism and a rejection of the old ways of doing things. In this world, everything has been replaced with a more efficient, modern alternative, and the government has even changed the names of the months to make them more in line with the socialist agenda. And instead of God, they worship the benefactor, a mysterious figure who's largely a stand-in for the new Soviet government. And this brings us into the first way that We is a mystical novel. Zamyatin uses the figure of the benefactor, the glass city, and mathematical precision to represent a kind of anti-utopia. He believed that the utopian ideals of his time were actually destroying the human spirit, and that a true utopia would take into account not just the physical needs of humans, but also their spiritual ones. In fact, in an essay published shortly before We, Zamyatin said that, quote, "We can measure the speed of a train and the quantity of sugar in the blood of a citizen. But what standard can we apply to the beauty of a human face or the poetry of a sunset?" End quote. This idea that there's something more to humanity than just the physical is a big theme in We, and something that the benefactor and his followers don't really take into account. When D530 is sent to fix the window in the apartment of the woman he loves, he sees that she's made a small shrine to the sun, something that the citizens aren't allowed to have because they're supposed to worship the benefactor instead. Later on, when D503 is being tortured by the secret police, he thinks about the poem Ode to the Evening Breeze by Pasternak, which describes how beautiful the natural world is and how it makes the speaker feel alive. These two instances show that Zamyatin believed that humans needed more than just order and efficiency in their lives. They also needed beauty, freedom, and love. But the most interesting thing about the way that Zamyatin wrote We is how he used the concept of the one state to explore the nature of power. One of the most common interpretations of We is that the one state represents totalitarianism, particularly as it was practiced in the Soviet Union at the time Zamyatin was writing. The idea that there's only one state reflects the Soviet Union's desire to be the one and true communism. The belief that they were the only country that could achieve true communism and that other versions of communism were simply wrong. This is also reflected in the fact that the main character, D503, is part of the United Number, a secret police force tasked with rooting out any dissidents or people who are against the one state. One of the most disturbing aspects of the one state is how it treats its citizens. As we've already talked about, the benefactor is a kind of godlike figure who's never questioned, and the citizens are expected to worship him and obey his laws without question. In fact, the citizens are so obsessed with order and stability that they don't even seem to notice how awful their lives are. The streets are always clean, the buildings are always in repair, and there's never any noise or disorder. But this perfect order comes at a terrible price. The citizens are treated like numbers, like D503, and not human beings. They're not allowed to have families or make choices for themselves, and they're constantly under the surveillance of the united number. Zamyatin shows just how far this goes when he describes the process of getting married. It's basically a transaction in which two people are matched up by the state and then become property of the state. In this passage, he says, quote, "To marry means to become the property of the state. To cease being a separate individual, to merge with another person and become one whole." End quote. Now, when we think of dystopias today, we often think of surveillance states and powerful governments that keep tabs on everything their citizens do. And while Zamyatin didn't invent this trope, he definitely helped to popularize it. The idea that the state knows everything about its citizens and that they have no privacy is one of the most common themes in dystopian fiction today. We live in a world where it's easy to share too much about ourselves online and where companies know more about us than we might want them to. Zamyatin's warning about the dangers of living in a world without privacy and freedom is one that still resonates today. Another reason why We is such an important book is because of its influence on later dystopian novels like Brave New World and 1984. Zamyatin created a world that was so detailed and believable that it's easy to see how other writers could have been inspired by it. The world of We is one that's all too familiar to us today, a world of constant surveillance, a powerful government, and a population that's been stripped of its rights and freedoms. It's a world that we might be tempted to dismiss as unrealistic or far-fetched, but it's a world that Zamyatin showed us is not only possible, but may be closer to reality than we'd like to think. You can see the influence of We in books like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, which is set in a future world where everyone is happy and free from pain, but at the cost of their freedom and individuality. Or George Orwell's 1984, which is set in a world of perpetual war and oppression under a totalitarian regime. Both of these books were directly influenced by We, and both explore similar themes of control, freedom, and the dangers of unchecked power. In many ways, Zamyatin's novel paved the way for these later works and helped to establish the dystopian genre as a staple of science fiction. Finally, We is important because it offers a warning about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of protecting our freedom and individuality. Zamyatin's novel is a reminder that we should be wary of those who seek to control us, and that we should always fight for our right to think and act for ourselves. The story of D-503 and the citizens of the one state is a cautionary tale that's as relevant today as it was when it was written. In a world where technology is advancing at an unprecedented pace, and where governments are becoming increasingly powerful, it's easy to see the warning signs that Zamyatin was pointing to. With the increasing use of facial recognition and other forms of surveillance, the erosion of privacy, and the rise of dehumanizing systems like those used in factories and workplaces, Zamyatin's warning is one that we should heed if we want to protect the freedoms that we enjoy today. And let's not forget that Zamyatin himself understood the importance of speaking out against injustice and standing up for what you believe in, even in the face of danger. Despite the persecution he faced for writing We, he continued to write and speak out against the Soviet regime until his death in 1937. His courage in doing so is an inspiration to us all. So why is We still important today? Because it's a story that's as relevant today as it was when it was written. It's a story about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of protecting our freedom and individuality. It's a story that reminds us to be wary of those who seek to control us and to always fight for our right to think and act for ourselves. Ultimately, it's a story that's a starting point for understanding the archetypal conflict between freedom and imposed order. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.